two, one. Huh? Oh. One, two, one.
Video kan? Video kan? Tuginya
resume.
Gine neydi ya? Tabii. Ingine ni idea. Ingine ni idea.
ਦੁਖੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਦਰਦ ਨਿਵਾਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਤਪਦੀ ਹਵਾ ਜ਼ੁਲਮ ਦੀ ਠਾਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਮਹਿਕ ਅਣਖ ਦੀ ਜਗਤ ਖਿਲਾਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਪੈਰ ਪਟਨੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਇਆ ਏ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਮਰਦੀ ਆ ਗਮੜੇ ਦੀ ਕਰਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਮਰਦੀ ਆ ਗਮੜੇ ਦੀ ਜਿਸ ਖਾ
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I can't hear you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. That
Good
sounds
morning.
so. I'd like to officially welcome you to the launch of the annual national shadow budget for the fiscal year 2023-2024. Before I continue with the greetings and the official welcoming, as well as general recognition, I would like to ask you all to arise for the national anthem. We proceed to the East African Community National Anthem. As we begin, I would like to recognize the presence of Honorable Dr. Isaac Mwaura, the Chief Administrative Secretary of the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Thank you very much for being here. That said, our Chief Guest of Honor, Dr. Honorable Isaac Mwaura, our CEO, James Muraguri, distinguished colleagues, members of the Fourth Estate, our online viewers from all over the globe, ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. I feel like I've said good morning so many times. I should find a new greeting for this day. But my name is Luri Chugusuk from the Institute of Public Finance, and I will be your MC for the day. I'm very happy to see all of you here today, and we totally honor the fact that you've been able to be present in this room, and we are delighted to be transforming public finance management together. That said, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this special event as IPF launches the annual national shadow budget for the fiscal year 2023-2024. And best believe we have a lot in store for you today about what the day is going to look like. And generally, building strong evidence for decision making in not only public finance management, but in general, the general aspect of governance is one of the most indispensable focus of the Institute of Public Finance Management. And that is really why we are here, and that is why we do what we do. And this is perhaps one of the most fundamental aspects of this specific report that we have on board today. And we're launching this document at a pretty interesting time. I know you've had interesting words such as volatility, financial crunch, cost of living, mwananchi anaumia. I know you've had all those words somewhere. You've heard about general conflicts here and there that sort of affect, the financial well-being of the nation. You've heard about elements such as dollarization. You've heard of elements such as budget. You've heard of elements such as governance. And all these aspects literally come together to show us why we need this specific evidence-based document. Now, I like to begin by asking the people in the room, what is your favorite public finance management word? And Marianne, I think you're going to need to help me pick 1 or 2 words from the table that is on your right and the table that's here in the middle. Just one of the most favorite public finance management words from the people in the room today. Yes. Allocative efficiency. Any table, Marianne. Feel free.
Accountability.
Accountability. One more.
Austerity.
Austerity. Okay. A lady. Ladies in public finance management. We want to hear one of your voices.
Transparency.
Transparency. All right. There are so many aspects that I said in the room today, and they're all valuable to public finance management. With that said, the room is filled with different people from all over the globe and people who've been meaningful for the work of the Institute of Public Finance. Before I just tell you what the Public Finance Institute of Public Finance does when it comes to the specific words that you just mentioned, allow me to recognize a few partners that have been very integral in general public finance engagements, and most of them are in the room today. From the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to the Oxford Policy Management, APHRC, TISA, IBP Kenya, End Fund, PRB, AFIDEP, Transparency International, Kenyatta University, World Vision, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, Christian Aid, FCDO, NEPAD, USAID, Zalendo. Anybody I have not mentioned here today, please feel very welcomed. Yeah. Now on to who the Institute of Public Finance is. The Institute of Public Finance is a non-profit think tank that generates research-driven evidence, unquestionable evidence for advocacy, and provides technical assistance to state and non-state actors in order to promote equitable, efficient, and effective public finance management underpinned by transparency, accountability, and participation. Whatever word you are thinking about earlier, I believe you have had it in that general description of the Institute of Public Finance. Now, with that background, we will be hearing a lot from the Institute of Public Finance and other stakeholders that have been very integral in the engagement of promoting public finance principles in Kenya and the globe at large. Ideally, we will have the presentation of the shadow budget, and then we will proceed to honor our keynote address from our chief guest. And then we have a very interesting panel discussion somewhere in between the day. And I can see Abraham Rugo right there. I can see Rosemary on board. Then we have the official day, right? Are we in agreement with how the day is looking? Doesn't it look a bit more like transforming public finance management? Well, I hope I'll ask the question again by the time we're finishing. But with that said, we will have our word from our CEO, Mr. James Muraguri. And with that said, a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for James as it comes to the stage.
Thank you very much, Lulit. We very much appreciate the amazing work that you and the team at IPF are doing. Our honorable guests, my good friend, Honorable Dr. Isaac Mwaura, our partners, IBP, PATH, HENET, APHRC, PLB, TI, Mzalendo, APLM, NEPAD. So excited, so glad that you're here. The member, we are so grateful. And karibuni sana. Today, the Institute of Public Finance for the financial year 2023 to promote deeper engagement between actors in the budget process. As core public finance values in Kenya's budget process: transparency, accountability, and participation in decision and equity, effectiveness and efficiency in allocation of public expenditure. The OBS Open Budget Survey 2021 returned a score of 31 for Kenya for public participation, 50 for transparency of the budget, and 54 for oversight of the public expenditure, with the Parliament having an individual score of 45 and the Auditor General having an individual score of 72. So the oversight component was 54. So meaning Parliament, within the oversight element of the transparency survey, open budget survey, Parliament was our weakest link. Now, that brings us to the conversation we're having today on launching the national annual shadow budget, and primarily driving the conversation to our Parliament to support them as they interrogate the expenditure proposals presented by the National Treasury. The shadow budget, the key message for the shadow budget for the financial year 2023 is that current budget documents leave many questions unanswered about the past budget performance and the current budget choices. The shadow budget demonstrates this by assessing government expenditures across sectors in previous financial years, proposed expenditure ceilings, and forward-looking spending priorities and policy goals in broader PFM and efficiency and effectiveness in PFM. The highlight of this third edition of the National Annual Shadow Budget is a set of questions that Parliament and civil society in their oversight role should ask and demand answers on from the executive arm of government responsible for budget planning, implementation, and execution. This publication comes at a critical time when the economy's recovery pathway depends significantly on fiscal consolidation and fiscal discipline. As we've noted over the last few days, the biggest conversation has been on the cash crunch, with civil servants not having their pay, Parliament missing their salary, and the country having to honor its debt obligation, which is the first charge on the public finances. So this launch of the shadow budget is strategically timed to provide feedback to the government and for approval by April 30th. As we all know, the Public Finance Management Act requires the National Treasury to submit the budget proposals to Parliament for approval by 30th of April every year. This National Annual Shadow Budget has gone through a legalized methodology that has been, engaged through courtesy of support from technically from our partners and individual experts who joined IPF to ensure that we have this report ready before the National Treasury submits its estimates to Parliament. Assessment of government priorities and proposed allocations for financial year 2023-2024 are expected to examine the alignment of funding priorities and commitments made by government. Our consultation with stakeholders was to ensure that the shadow budget reflects the needs and priorities of various stakeholders. And we held consultations which helped to input into the approval process of the budget by Parliament. We hope that our Parliament will be able to strongly interrogate And we hope the budget committee will be able to provide proper guidance to the sectoral committees so that the ultimate report by the Budget and Appropriations Committee on the budget estimates in May and June before the approval will be substantive enough to guide the country to the next year. Key data sources of which my colleagues will present and which were used to inform the shadow budget included the budget review and outlook paper, the sector working group reports, quarterly budget implementation review reports, budget policy statement, and the budget for the financial year 2022-2023. We also considered the IMF World Economic Outlook, and as we know, yesterday the IMF launched the Economic Outlook, and which, based on the economic outlook that we released in January, significantly does not change our projection of the economy growing by 5.1% this year. While it's a good way to look at it, we are still hoping that within the next 9 months, now that we've had the rains and the farmers are getting fertilizer, that the cost of living in the country will progressively start coming down. And that's with those few remarks. I want to invite my colleague, Bernard, to come and take us through the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Our chief guest, our protocols observed. I'm happy this morning to present to you our annual shadow budget. And James has highlighted the rigorous process that we followed to generate this document. We have had stakeholder engagements with the academia, practitioners, and sector experts. We have also looked at not only nominal allocations, but we have gone beyond to look at sector performances. We have looked at financials and non-financials, and we raise critical questions that we would also like to hear on the floor of the House when this document is tabled to Parliament. And the reason we embark on this interesting conversation is because every time we listen to the budget speech or reactions from the members of Parliament, I mostly hear them say, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a progressive budget. But if you ask how progressive it is, maybe few of them will tell you how progressive a budget is if we only look at nominal numbers and we stop there without looking at how we execute our budget. I will start by looking at the macro fiscal spotlight. Looking at the projected growth by our national treasury at 6% in 2024, we ask ourselves beyond this projected growth, whether Kenya is really achieving an inclusive growth. If you look at the World Bank Gini Index that shows us income inequality, Kenya is at 40.8%, meaning we are not distributing our resources in a way that is equitable. So does our 2023-24 budget help us in achieving income distribution? Are we really fighting poverty through the budget? And what are the drivers of growth in Kenya? Because we cannot just look at growth. What is driving growth in Kenya? Currently, unemployment is so high. Manufacturing industry not growing as expected. So what is really driving this growth? Is it public spending? If so, then where are we getting it wrong? Then we also look at the fiscal policy measures that the government has put in place or intends to put in place to mitigate risks, because we have associated risks to this projected growth. As you are aware, globally there is an economic slowdown in war, and then as we speak, the external financial borrowing conditions for emerging and frontier economies are not favorable. So we cannot actually rely on debt as it were before. And what does now this mean if we miss this growth target? Remember, we have a projected fiscal deficit of 4.4% of our GDP. So if we miss the 6.1, it definitely means our fiscal deficit to GDP will go up. And if, again, we are affected by these underlying conditions, it means we will miss our revenue targets, and that will push us more into borrowing. And from our analysis, we have seen how CFS has grown, and the largest component is debt service, and we are already feeling the pain. Civil servants do not have salaries. And as we speak, we looked at the change in the CFS account, and we also looked at the percentage of our recurrent expenditure, the percentage of CFS account as a percentage of recurrent expenditure. And what we get to see is, for example, for the CFS, it's increasing in the fiscal year 23-24 by 6.6%. Meaning we are not yet out of the woods. We expect debt service to continue rising, and this is the kind of evidence that we want to look critically and ask ourselves, what does now this mean to our future budget? And what it means going forward is the next question, whether we are really achieving intergenerational equity. And when we ask this kind of a question, we are asking, if we borrow so much today, how much are we leaving for the next generation? Because when we think of financing our budget today, we must ask ourselves, as we continue borrowing, how much are we leaving to the future generation? As we speak, in the fiscal year 23-24, fiscal CFS, which is the first charge in the budget, and which the largest component is debt service, will be at 67%. And when we look at our debt as a percentage of our total budget, it's 30%. So you can imagine 30% of our budget is going to debt. That is as of fiscal year 21-22. And as we speak, debt has really grown, debt service has grown. So right now, we must be way above 30%. And we also looked at the sectors so as to see which sectors have gained and which ones have lost. And we compared this with the supplementary budget one, because the new, the current government, which is new, came up with the supplementary budget one to align with the manifesto, to align with the economic times, to align with the needs that were pressing as of the time. And most of them, for example, in the agriculture sector, are still there. We have not met them. And that actually drew our attention why the allied sector, for example, has a budget cut of about 12%. We compared to the supplementary budget. The new government committed to support food production. We have not yet achieved food security. We have not yet met the commitment to subsidize fertilizer. Then why do we see a 12% cut to the agriculture sector? Does it mean the government is deviating from the commitment, the very commitment that it made during the campaign period? And that now drives the accountability question. We have to hold the government to account on the commitment to deliver on its manifesto. And but we also realize that health is among the top gainers in the 23-24 budget. compared to what was allocated in the supplementary budget 1. Again, we have social protection. It rose by 0.4%. Remember how many Kenyans are suffering? Over 4 million Kenyans are faced with starvation and hunger. Cost of living is so high. We need to protect the vulnerable in the society. How, again, can we afford to cut budgetary allocation compared to supplementary budget 1, especially to the social protection sector? We need also to protect people living with disabilities and the marginalized and others. So these are some of the critical questions we ask, and we also expect our parliamentarians to take this kind of evidence to drive this conversation on the floor of the House. So some of the questions, for example, we have highlighted looking at the sectoral allocations is why budget to the adult sector has reduced by 12% when we have not attained food security, and then the intervention that the government committed to in respect to fertilizer subsidies has not been achieved. And again, there is a huge disconnect between the 2023-2024 allocation when we look at the of the questions, and minimal are in the main document. Then we looked at the cross-cutting issues across the sector. First, we assessed the sectors, okay? And we also realized that there is a high budget absorption at an average of 87%, but when you look at the achievement of key performance indicators, it's very low. So what does that tell us? Are we really efficient in budget utilization? Why should we have high budget? KPIs that are so unrealistic. Some are outrageously met. Some sectors do not even publish relevant information explaining or giving justification why we have such variances. Another thing is the growth in pending bills. But when you look at the programs that have high pending bills, the budget absorption rates are defunded. Resources will never be adequate, and therefore we must think beyond asking for only more resources. Yes, I have talked about how we have the fragmentation and overlaps in across the sectors, and then if you move to the previous slide, when we looked at GECA and, for example, and social protection, we realized there was a presidential directive pensions. For example, the Women Fund, Youth Fund, and WESO Fund. So they were supposed to be merged to form a Biashara Fund. But instead of us consolidating those funds so that we are able to align our KPIs and to also reduce some of these administrative costs, we see the government introducing other funds. For example, the Credit Guarantee Scheme, now we have the Hustler Fund, but why can't we, for example, go with such a directive that was given in 2013 so that we can consolidate some of these programs or interventions. And then, like I said, now we have to think beyond nominal numbers. We cannot keep celebrating budget growth. Now we have 3.6 trillion budget from the previous, from the current budget is 3.3. Now we have the proposed one is 3.6. Members of Parliament will tell us it's a progressive budget. I don't dispute, but how will it be progressive if we continue having low absorption rates? Because if we continue having low absorption rates, it definitely means the Mama Boga will not get services delivered, development projects will restore, yet we approve a budget that we term as progressive. We looked at, I give only, in the main document, we have analyzed all the sectors, but in this presentation, I have picked just a few. For example, when we look at the health sector, development budget, absorption rate is at 68%. What does that mean when we approve a very huge budget, but it ends up not being absorbed, especially to a critical sector like health? If we continue still looking at health, it's surprising that primary healthcare is not spared by low budget absorption. Program 1, preventive, promotive, and reproductive, maternal, neonatal, child, and adolescent health, absorbed 51% in the fiscal year 21-22. That is primary healthcare. What does that tell us? So that's why we are saying we cannot afford to only talk about the nominal numbers. They are very huge. They are very attractive, but where does it leave the common mwananchi when only 51% of the budget in the health sector is absorbed? And this is related to primary health care. Then looking at financials and non-financials, it dictates a focus on efficiency and realistic setting of targets. Why do we say so? Now, this is the education sector. If you look at primary education, for example, absorption rate is at 84%. But the KPIs that were achieved in the fiscal year 21-22 were at 52%. If you look at quality assurance and standards, absorption rate is at 94%, but KPIs achieved at 44%. What does that tell us? Yet, absorption rate seems good, but we are not achieving when it comes to delivering or achieving KPIs. Is the government really delivering? Are the sectors really setting KPIs that are realistic, or where do we miss the point? Then we looked at fiscal decentralization. And the goal of fiscal decentralization is to move functions, responsibilities, and resources from the national government to the devolved units. I think that's well understood to all of us. It sounds theoretical. But we reviewed 3 financial years, starting 21-22. So we reviewed 2018-19, then 2021 to 2022. And we realized that counties were only allocated as per the CRA recommendation in the fiscal year 21-22. But notably, equitable share has been more than 15% of the recommended 15% in the Constitution. But there is still a lag in the most recent audited account. So where are our parliamentarians in this? Why do we have this lag? Where is the Office of the Auditor General? Why do we have this lag? Where are we missing this? So even as we advocate for additional resources, we must also talk about delays in disbursements. Most counties are now saying that they have not paid salaries for like 3 or 4 months. Why? Because of delays in disbursements. Even as we celebrate increase in allocations in the fiscal year 23-24 budget from 370 to 385, of which benefit will it be to the common mwananchi if we continue having delays in disbursement? We are not disbursing 370 in a timely way, in a way that will enable counties to absorb this budget. Then it's of which benefit if we increase this to 385. We have to also sort out the issue of delays in disbursement first. 10 years down the line, we have devolution, but we are still struggling to answer some of these questions. Why do counties underperform in own source revenue? And this forces counties to often rely on transfer of equitable shares. Why are we still not able to answer this question? Okay. Why have county governments only absorbed 57% of development budget against 89% of recurrent budget? Have we achieved all our development goals or our development projects so that we can afford to absorb only 57% when it comes to development budget? Why are some counties spending more than the legally required, that 5% of the total left errors when it comes to our why has the BPA policy guidelines to unlock arrears? And lastly, the national government is to go to the counties. So most of the times when you listen to our policymakers and our parliamentarians on national television, they keep telling us devolution is a good thing. Yes, it is, but there are critical questions that we need to address even as we go into the 2023-2024 budget. And we have the key takeaways, the key messages. First, resources are ever scarce, and that's why looking at the sector working reports, all the sectors are having resource gaps. So we have to think about a budget that is bringing equity and efficient allocations. We also have to push our sectors to achieve KPIs so that they are aligned with how much of the budget they absorb. Then we also have to push for absorption of development budget, both at the national and the county level. We have more of this in the main document, covered in details. Then Parliament needs to utilize evidence generated by think tanks like IPF to ask hard questions, like those generated in this report. So in the main report, we ask questions and we give our view as a think tank. And this will drive this conversation, even as Parliament prepares to receive these submissions from the National Treasury. And I had my presentation with a quote from one Harvard scholar, and he said, "Government is extremely wasteful. There is not a single day that I'm not exacerbated by not just how wasteful it is, but how deliberate it is and how unbothered people are." Who are the people? The people are you and I, okay? So it's high time that oversight institutions, civil society, members of the further state, and the people must be bothered now. So even as you read the main document, as we go into the fiscal year 23-24, how government is wasteful. So for the 2023-24 budget to make sense to us, please let's be bothered. Thank you.
For that elaborate presentation on the National Annual Shadow Budget. And through Bernard's conversation, very critical things have come up, and we literally aligned to that quote that he's just finished with. And if we just hear things like, how exactly are we holding the government to account so that they can ensure all commitments are met and are not just roadside declarations? We've had that very clearly. Another element is that through our budget processes, how is the government protecting vulnerable and marginalized groups? Is that what we're seeing? I don't know what your answer is, but I'm going to ask you those questions at one point. Are we going to curb resource gaps and all those points whatsoever? And efficiency comes in terms of, are we ensuring intergenerational equity at all points when we're discussing budget, when we are creating budgets, when we are implementing, approving large budgets, and not necessarily absorbing enough, or are absorbing everything, but we cannot see the results of whatever we are doing? Are we achieving the right? Are we
Harvard scholar on that component on government wasteful spending. In fact, varied questions that you've asked in that presentation. But ladies and gentlemen, I need to invite our guests today. Our guest today is Dr. Honorable Isaac Mwaura, CBS Chief Administrative Secretary, Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Dr. Mwaura is from Nelson Mandela University. Masters in Arts and Social and Public Policy Studies from University. Legislature, he has served as an center between 2017 and 2022, and previously as a member of Parliament in National Assembly between 2010 and 2017, representing special interest groups. He has championed increase in budget allocation to the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, as well as inclusion of youth with disabilities to the National Youth Service. In 2016, Dr. Mwaura was honored with the first class Chief of the Burning Spear for his immense disability advocacy and parliamentary achievement. In 2006, Mwaura and other persons with albinism in Kenya founded Albinism Society of Kenya. And Dr. Mwaura is an author of the book, Discourse of Human Rights, Disability and Development in Kenya, 2009. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Honorable Mwaura when it comes to make this keynote speech.
Good morning. Thank you very much, my brother James, for such a wonderful introduction. To come and share with you, because the role that I've been given in the executive is the State Department of Legislative and Parliamentary Affairs. It's a new state department. And why? It's because I am one of the very few people who has had the opportunity to serve in both houses, in the National Assembly and the Senate. So I can tell the rigmarole that goes between these two houses when it comes to the budget making process. I want to really commend you because of this opportunity that IPF has had and all the members of the civil society in presenting a shadow budget, based on the ceilings of the BPS, so that then by the time the actual document is tabled this month, we will be able to look at, is it actually, feeding into these gaps that have been addressed? And of course, going by the quote of the Harvard professor, I thought he went to Oxford, David D. I mean, but I get the joke. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is true that our budget is always incremental in nature. People are asking for more. And of course, money is also losing value. And the question would be, do people want more money so that Kenyans can be better? Is it leading to a better, livelihood? Today, as I was coming here, I don't know why my driver took a detour to pass through Juja Road, but I was shocked, to pass by Mathare, to see the kind of squalor, poverty, urban poverty that is still in this country. We are in a very highly unequal society. Now, government exists to resolve problems that are affecting the common mwananchi and to lift people from the bottom of the pyramid. However, the reality of our budget making process is such that we have had what you call infrastructure debt-driven growth, where a nominal growth of the GDP by about 1 to 3%. It never came to pass because it's not just the fact that you inject money into the economy and then you move forward. At that point, our economy, nominal GDP, was about 7 trillion. It has since grown to over 10 trillion. And so, be that as it may, you then have a situation where our fiscal headroom has really, really shrunk. We don't have even capacity to borrow further because we have overextended ourselves. And we need to do studies, I hope it's in the main document, of debt to GDP ratio in real terms, not the one that is imagined, because I think the last administration, put our GDP, nominal GDP at about 13 trillion. I beg to differ. I think it's slightly less than that, but our debt could be much higher than that if we were to have, full disclosure. But what does that portend for us? It is the desire of this current administration to do budget, fiscal consolidation and budget restructuring in order to ensure that then we have a dividend and increased productivity in this matter. However, ladies and gentlemen, as it has been correctly noted, you can see a marginal increase in terms of the budget itself from 3.3 trillion to about 3.6 trillion. And the reason behind this is largely not because of increased expenditure, really, but because of the fact that we are paying so much more, through our revenues so that we can offset the debt that we have. I think by the last time I checked, we are paying about 1.3 trillion directly within a framework where KRA is actually struggling to raise about 2 trillion shillings or thereabout. And so even when you compare in terms of debt servicing versus revenue, ordinary revenue, the revenue that we are getting directly, then you can see we are in dire straits. And in that regard, then government is forced actually to continuously borrow as if to just maintain the budget lines. And you need just to look further down and see that during just around COVID, our debt ceiling had been put at around 6 trillion, and Parliament was persuaded, I must agree, to increase that to 9 trillion. That has already been expended. Within, the COVID years, we've borrowed over 3 trillion shillings because, of course, performance of the economy has not been doing very well. So then you look at also the issue around our private sector, because we, government has actually gone ahead to borrow a lot of money from the private sector and in excess of 900 billion to service its own, recurrent expenditure. But it is the desire of this administration to ensure that we reduce, our fiscal deficit from 6.2% to 5.7% in the medium term and in the long run to about 4.4%. That is achievable. But of course, we also have to deal with the issue of inflation, because definitely this is a global phenomenon as a result of the fact that, of course, even hard currencies like dollar have actually, lost their purchasing power by up to 97%. So that tells you with our shilling, which is becoming weaker or has become weaker over time, then we are more vulnerable, especially when you have the dollarization of our public debt to the extent that then, of course, the more it increases, then it leads to us, servicing more in terms of Kenya shillings. So, yes, indeed, we are in a situation really that was predictable. I must also declare here that we are not finding ourselves in this situation because we did not see it coming. I myself, from as early as 2014, I could see that the administration that would take over power in 2022 would have a lot of challenge, and it didn't matter who would take over power. But it is a desire, therefore, of the Kenya Kwanza administration to ensure that we actually subsidize production rather than subsidize consumption, which has been what was prevailing in the last tier of the last administration. And of course, we made progress because you can see clearly even the cost of commodities is going down in terms of like unga, in terms of cooking oil, and hopefully that with the advantage of fertilizer, then with these rains, because remember we've come from a long dry spell, that then food, the cost of living shall go down significantly because over 50% of Kenyan households spend, their income on food actually alone. I mean, to a large extent, 7 to 80% at times, just to make ends meet. So that I think is a very critical aspect of our economy. The other thing, of course, is to stimulate, entrepreneurship, and that's why you find, the issues to do with the Hustler Fund, whereby you find over 7 million Kenyans are actually able to, get these monies on a daily basis. It may not be significant in terms of it being blown out of proportion, but certainly at the micro level, it is the desire that in the long term, that will also have a net effect in terms of at least cushioning the people at the bottom of the pyramid from the vulgarities of our economy. The other issue, of course, is, a very good progress that has been made by government is to also buy fuel. Instead of having a reserve of about $500 million, is buying fuel, directly using Kenya currency, so that at least the reserves that, of course, that have dwindled in terms of, in our national treasury, central bank, we are able to reduce that loss in terms of the exchange rate. And I think that will also really help in terms of reducing, the cost of $1 to Kenya shillings, which will really help us in the long run, so that then at least even in terms of balance of payment deficits, we don't lose quite a bit. So I think generally, I am very, very happy to see the kind of interlocution, the questions that IPF is asking through these shadow budgets, and I dare say that this could be the only shadow budget we have within our jurisdiction. And from my experience in Parliament, do not underestimate the questions that you ask when you appear before us. I will tell you without a doubt that many other times that when I was the vice chairman of the Finance and Budget Committee of Senate, we adopted recommendations from ISPAC, we adopted recommendations from IBP, Dr. Rugo, you are here, and also these coming early, today. It means that then we are already having an opportunity to engage with the relevant stakeholders within the budget making process, so that then we are able to ask the right kind of questions that actually generate discourse and debate. I would want to also say sometimes you will get more quality interrogation within the Senate, because it is not the house of caprice. It is a house that has lesser people, and people delve into the matters that need to be delved into. In the National Assembly, yes, you can, and especially because we have a very robust parliamentary budget office that also tries to do its best. In fact, one of the key achievements of that office is that they always correctly predict, the economic growth of the, better than even the National Treasury. So what I would therefore ask of you is, after this conversation that we are having here, because this is basically the beginning, it's a launch, that IPF, you engage the various parliamentary committees, especially the Budget and Appropriations Committee led by my good friend Didi Nyoro, and also the Senate Finance and Budget Committee, so that then also they can get to know exactly what is it that they need to look out into? Because the precept of real oversight, in this, architecture of the three arms of government is resident within Parliament, and Parliament is extremely powerful. If you look at the architecture of our 2010 Constitution, so that they can ask the right kind of question. Of course, I must also submit that you will always be, caught up in the shenanigans of party loyalty, because there is no way somebody who is supporting, the government of the day will be seen to want to embarrass, the government of the day, because then that would be misread or misconstrued to mean that they are being disloyal. But I think we are mature in democracy. We are able to have that space, especially now that members of cabinet will be asked questions on the floor of the House on what is it that they are doing with regards to their various ministries and state departments. And of course the CAS is finally, if we get approved by the courts or whatever the outcome, them and the PSS of course will also be able to answer the questions and the various reports of Parliament and the committees and whatever. So we can see an increased desire to be open, so that then those questions that we ask, or members of the civil society ask through those public hearings, through the committee retreats and what have you, then they actually feed into getting the right dividend for the people at the bottom of the pyramid. And that is very, very important, because one of the key findings that we've seen in this report is how is it that you can say that you're delivering to Kenyans, and yet the most vulnerable, the budget of the most vulnerable, always it has been reduced by some 0.something percentage there. And the truth of the matter is that when there are austerity measures in any jurisdiction, the first cuts are always for the vulnerable. It's usually the social protection sector that always gets affected. But yet most of the monies that are misappropriated are actually usually within huge infrastructural development projects. I think that's very, very important. But I also want to observe that, possibly because I do not have the benefit of having to go through the whole report, one of the things that you have brought out very clearly here is that there is duplication of roles. And you can see a very clear attempt by a government through Executive Order number 1 of 2023 to realign the functions of ministries, departments, and agencies. That is very, very noble. But then I want to ask of you, because it's something that I try to do, if we can have better accountability and budgets that speak to reality. Two things that need to happen is, number one, we need to have a sunset clause that also rests the issue of creating semi-autonomous government entities, so that they do not continue gobbling up from the exchequer, so that they are not just a permanent feature of creating jobs for people, and of course, not really giving the dividend that they require. I call it governmenting, where you create a structure that does not necessarily yield the results, some kind of synecurism. So that will tidy up, will clean up the structures of government, and therefore reallocate resources to efficiency, going forward. Number two, I think it is important for Parliament also to have what I call Parliamentary Audit Office. We have the Parliamentary Budget Office. And if you look at the architecture of our Constitution, the independent offices and constitutional commissions, somehow the Auditor General is really an annexure to Parliament, together with the Office of the Controller of Budget. But then the challenge of the kind of legislator that we have in this country is not really a legislator, is really, over and above being a legislator, a social welfare dispenser, somebody whose role is to go and officiate funerals and weddings, and of course vegetate and debate. And that's okay. That is what people elect, those who solve problem solvers. But then they do not have the luxury of thinking through the finesse that I can see in this room, because of these, push and pull here and there. So you will find 236 reports from the Controller of Budget, from the Auditor General, but they are lying, at some corner in Parliament. But if you have the Parliamentary Audit Office, they will be able to flesh out these issues, and this possibly could answer the question as to why the key performance indicators do not seem to tally with the resource allocation. That gap is quite telling, because if you have expended up to 87% of your budget, how is it that then you are not able to achieve that which is the reason as to why you are allocated those resources? So that, I think, is very, very important. And of course, we also need to understand the political reality of it, that politics is he who gets how, where and how. And sometimes that has no formula. I can tell you, as having been a member of the budget committee, sometimes it's just like the way you are dividing a carcass of a goat, and you get the leg, the other one. You know, if you do it that way, well, if Abraham and I share a leg, maybe James will get a taller leg than mine. You know, I mean, there is no formula about that. So that to the maximum extent possible, you need to also, you know, push to it that resources are not just allocated for the sake of expediency. I also want to submit that it is true. If you look at, for example, the budget of the Ministry of Health, at some point, I think 2 years ago, it was the national headquarter budget was about 98 billion, which was, you know, almost equivalent to all what the counties were allocating. The 47 counties were allocating for various, health, budgets, or responsibilities, including the level 4, 3, 2, and 1, hospitals that are within their purview. So I think that is an issue that is generally a governance problem. It is a governance problem because people want to hoard over, people want to empire build. And in a way, you need to keep on calling that out by providing alternatives to those resources, how they would be expended expeditiously in order to ensure that we have, proper, allocation and efficient allocation of resources. I am not officially in office. I must keep on reminding you that. But then where I have been domiciled, for now, is that we also have the Efficiency Monitoring Unit, the Inspectorate of State Corporations, the State Corporation Advisory Committee. So the Office of the Prime Cabinet Minister has got the responsibility of oversighting the executive arm of government, the execution part of it. So I think we also need to engage with that, office, James, so that then we see how is it that we can feed these findings that we find, as members of the civil society, that then inform, further programming, the performance contracting that was launched yesterday by the president, so that they are able to speak to the realities of the society. And that responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be gainsaid. Why can it not be gainsaid? It's the fact that people who are living from hand to mouth, people whose only preoccupation is how much they get in the evening, cannot have the luxury of interrogating a budget worth of trillions or billions of shillings. It is far too removed from their own reality as to question. In fact, I think Kenyans have become numb when they hear billions have been stolen. Oh, they've lost that kind of. So you have to keep on doing your work and knowing that you have the agency and legitimacy of the mandate that you have abrogated yourself, because you are self-determining, citizens who can actually shape the future of their country. As one of the American presidents said, that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We've got to continuously do so. Finally, I think the issue of pending bills is a huge problem, and you can see, without belaboring the point, that the previous administration was actually had spent over 100 billion shillings out of budget. These are unbudgeted expenditures, and another similar amount of money was bound to be expended in this financial year 2023-2024. And so therefore, then 22-23, I beg your pardon. And so therefore, you make a mockery of the budget making process, because if then you don't have to get through the PFM law, the manner in which then you have to follow the various articles 110, 111, 112, and 13 and 14 of the Constitution in approving, expenditure, including also Article 218, then you have a problem. You have a problem. The reason as to why, for example, the equalization fund has not been realized is really a cash flow issue. Is the availability of monies. And further to it also, I think we need also to look at the issues of exchequer release, because vis-a-vis procurement plans. So that then, is it realistically the way we are planning year per year? Is it possible for us to go back to the Kibaki years, or where we used to have the medium-term expenditure framework, so that you have a 3-year budget cycle that has a ceiling of the resource envelope, so that then you also take advantage of time and to deliver which can be delivered within 3 years instead of imagining you can do it within 1 year. And of course, the issue of pending bills, I think the good news is that out of the over 400 billion shillings that government has estimated, at least they were able to release about 60 billion in the supplementary one. And also down to counties like Kiambu, where they had a bill of about 7 billion, at least they have been able to pay a 350 million. But of course, this has got a very serious issue on productivity, going forward. So ladies and gentlemen, with those many and few remarks, I think I must commend you for this report. I hope and believe that James and IPF and all of us here will now take this advantage, maybe agree as civil society that this is a common rallying call, and then we use our resources as civil society to now engage various stakeholders so that they get to understand the issues that you have raised, and we continue having this conversation so that people can know that indeed we have an alert citizenship. I want to say, for me, you can always count on me as your ally, because they are reformers from outside, but they're also reformers from within. I thank you.
Another round for the public finance management specialist. Well, we've had several elements such as fiscal consolidation, performance contracting, elements such as allocative efficiency, elements such as ensuring that we can protect the vulnerable through our budget processes, elements such as transparency, accountability, elements such as public participation, which is very important in ensuring that our development needs are actually met and significant enough to ensure the protection and well-being of our respective citizens within our jurisdiction. Elements such as governance as a very key aspect that is needed to ensure proper implementation, creation, and planning within budget processes, and just trying to make sure that we are able to progress significantly, economically, socially, and politically. Thank you very much for that speech. It's been very elaborate, very transformative, and very insightful when it comes to how we need to look at key elements of public finance management. With that said, we need to move the discussion a bit up a notch and try and look at how we can ensure a progressive fiscal future in Kenya and the globe at large, which means that the discussion has to keep going on before we even launch this specific document. And it's very evident that it comes at a very relevant time when we need to keep amplifying the principles of public finance management. With that said, I'm about to call in a very interesting group of public finance management specialists, because that seems to be who we are in the room today. And it's about to get even hotter as we keep talking about this issue of public finance. So that said, it's the whole idea of, are we generating the right evidence? Are we implementing the right way? Are we absorbing the right way? Are we efficient in what we're doing? I don't know what you guys think. Marianne, before we move to this panel discussion, what are your opinions from the room to just hear one or two things? And people on the online platform, please feel free to drop your comments, questions, thoughts, opinions on the chat box right there. And anyone sharing content on the digital platforms, please feel free to use the hashtag evidence-based budgeting or hashtag Sauti ya Bajeti, hashtag annual national shadow budget if you feel it might work. So Marianne, I may need you to stand up and take a quick walk around the room before we move to the interesting segment that we're about to have. And what questions do you have? You know, not necessarily about the situation in the room, but what questions do you have as an individual? What have you been able to pick from the keynote address and from the annual national shadow budget itself? Please try and hold critical questions for the media plenary, but this can just be a whole segment where we share our thoughts, opinions, and personal sentiments. Where do we start? Do we start with Edwin? He looks very ready.
Will I need to stand?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thanks so much, Lurit. Mine isn't a question per se. My introduction. My name is Edwin Brech. I work for Transparency International Kenya. It's such a pleasure to be in this meeting. I mean, looking at the presentation that has been made, including the ones from our keynote speaker, the major issue has actually been the budgeted corruption. In my view, the aspect of domestic resource mobilization in Kenya is quite huge and quite enough for all of us. But the challenge has been that we actually lose this kind of resources as a result of the illicit financial flows and generally money flowing out of Kenya based on that. But have we really exhausted the aspect of strengthening the oversight role of parliamentarians? And my major wish today was if some members of parliament would be here today, because the issue that we're currently facing is as a result of the oversight role, failure by the oversight institution, especially parliament, to look at this aspect. Number two, we talk about transparency generally, and more often we talk about the aspect of public participation. I think the major challenge has been, yes, we do have the public participation, but is it really enough to give room for engaging the citizens in terms of public finance, in terms of public participation? Interesting, there was a case yesterday, just over the week, on persons with disabilities amendment bill. And the deadline for submission was on Monday, and Monday was a holiday, you know? So I think for us, it is critical that we do engage Parliament, especially on that aspect. And the last one is safeguarding the leadership and integrity in financial management. I'm glad that Honorable Maura is here. He's been a great champion, in terms of enhancing transparency, and by virtue that he's actually a member of APNAC. I don't know if you're still a member of APNAC, by virtue that you go there, but these are the key critical questions that we need to ask ourselves. And I think it's a big thumbs up to IPF, because not developing such a thing is actually a great thing. We look forward to further engagements. Yeah.
Other engagements are on the way in a few minutes. But yeah, I totally agree with you in the element of looking into measures such as domestic resource mobilization and strengthening the whole idea of oversight, which directly underpin this specific flagship product that we have on board. Now, I would like to welcome our able panel that is about to shake the room a little bit, and I hope you're ready. So I will begin by introducing our panel moderator, and then she will go ahead and introduce our public finance management specialist. That name is sticking in my head at this point. I hope it is in yours too. But Marianne Wanjiku is going to be our panel moderator for this specific session. She is a public finance management specialist with 6 years of experience, with a deep understanding of budgetary processes and public finance management systems. Her expertise lies in designing and implementing capacity building programs aimed at improving citizens' ability to participate in government decision-making processes, particularly at the national and the county level. Marianne, I would like to welcome you to the stage to proceed and invite the rest of our panelists. A round of applause for Marianne as she comes in.
Thank you, Lurit, our chief guest, our CEO, distinguished guests, and my colleagues, good morning. So I want us to get into a very brief session where we are going to look at the report more detailed. And to do so, I have a panel, as Lurit has called them, panel of experts drawn from various fields, but on PFM. And first up, we'll have Rosemary Muganda, Rosemary is the Regional Advocacy Director, Africa at PATH, which is a global non-profit dedicated to achieving health equity. She has extensive experience in the non-profit sector, having served at PATH Kenya and other organizations. Karibu sana, Rosemary. Next, we'll have Dr. Abraham Rugo. He's a country manager, International Budget Partnership. And he has a wealth of experience working in decentralization, participatory governance, and public finance management in Kenya. Karibu sana, Daktari. Last but not least, we have our very own Ruth Kendago. She works as the head of research at the Institute of Public Finance. She's an economist and a researcher, and she has over 15 years experience working and directing the implementation of research, teaching economics, and performing managerial duties in institutions and government. Karibu sana, Ruth. So to help us with the discussions, because we cannot discuss everything that is in the report, we have picked a few questions that I will be asking the panelists, and they are going to respond to that. They are but not limited to budget credibility, fiscal decentralization, and health. And then towards the end of the session, we shall pick a few questions from the audience. So Ruth, I'll start with you, because today we are discussing the shadow budget, but most people in the room would want to know what is the shadow budget and what unique approach was used in this edition, in the preparation and everything else.
Thank you very much. The shadow budget, and particularly what we are presenting today, what we are launching today, the document that we are releasing today to the public, addressing, and the document that we hope that all oversight institutions, from parliament to civil societies who engage in accountability measures, we want them to talk about. The document we're releasing today looks at government expenditures, looks at utilization of government resources. Our shadow budget calls for efficiency and effectiveness in utilization of government resources. If you look at what government has been presenting as its annual budgets every year, government will give the sector allocations, the ceilings for each sector, the allocation to the programs and the sub-programs for every financial year. Our shadow budget picks that information, analyzes past performance in both financial and non-financial indicators, and associates this past performance with the future plans, the priorities and the allocations for the coming financial year 2023-2024. We are analyzing and examining the trends and asking questions as to whether we are going to improve efficiency moving forward. Are we transferring problems from previous financial years moving forward? Or are we increasing our efficiency and utilization of these limited resources that the country has? Our speaker today has mentioned about, our keynote speaker has mentioned about creation of agencies, for example. Some of the questions we are asking is, why do we have these task forces that come with very solid recommendations? They have spent resources, spent time to come up with recommendations, then the recommendations are not factored in any way in the key performance indicators, they're not factored in the priorities, neither is there budget allocation for implementation of those recommendations. We are asking today, why have departments, sectors, programs that have posted low absorption rates in previous budgets still being allocated increased resources in the coming financial year? What measures have been put in place to ensure that the increased allocations being given to the sectors will be absorbed, bearing in mind that in the previous years, these departments were not able to absorb what they had? So will the KPIs be achieved in the coming year? Or are we still going to go through this same circle of saying, yes, money was allocated, it was not absorbed, so KPIs were not absorbed? So essentially, what our shadow budget document is doing today is building or reinforcing the call that even our leaders are talking about. The other day, and we have quoted a very famous scholar who talks about wastage of resources in the country. Our document raises the voice and takes it a notch higher by citing specific examples in the sectors, in the programs, in the activities, where there are inefficiencies, where there are ineffective gaps identified, and calling upon Parliament to ask these questions when they will be discussing the 2023-2024 budget. To probe those questions, ask those questions from the state departments, ask those questions from the MDAs, and let them answer before you approve further allocations of resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. You've talked about efficiency and effectiveness in utilization of public finances. So why then is it important for us, or why is it important in the generation of the shadow budget to go beyond the financial information and then focus more on non-financials, and in this case, the key performance indicators?
Thank you. So our shadow budget has moved beyond looking at the numbers. Most of the time, conversations around budgets have talked about the numbers. How much money, how much millions, how much billions are being allocated to the education sector? How much is allocated to agriculture and rural development? How much is allocated to environment and such? Our analysis moves beyond the numbers in the monies to looking at the non-financial indicators. These non-financial indicators were the basis for allocation of those monies, and ideally should be the basis to guide implementation of projects and absorption of those budgets. Let me use an example of the livestock, the State Department for Livestock. The State Department for Livestock in the coming financial year, 2023-2024, has a significant proposed increase in their budget of around 168%. But this same State Department, in the previous financial year, 2021-2022, were able to achieve only 35% of their key performance indicators. And so we are asking, if we're giving more money to this State Department, we're not objecting the more money. It is necessary to address. There are important projects identified, for example, the Twende project. There are important projects identified, such as the livestock commercialization project. We do not dispute those important programs. What we are asking is, what measures have been put in place to ensure that with this budgetary increase that the sector has been given, that the State Department has been given, will be absorbed, KPIs will be achieved, and hence service delivery will be rendered to the citizens, to the mwananchi. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Dr. Rugo, next. So having worked in the PFM space and having an understanding on how the budgets are done and implemented, how credible are our budgets?
Thanks. I think, first of all, it poses to define the term credibility. So credible, largely, you can argue it from many angles. There's what we use as a short of that this is how much was allocated versus how much you spent. But suppose somebody else can actually push it further and ask, actually, do these budgets respond to the needs of the people? I think that's a bigger question, which even people in this room, sometimes we don't discuss that. We take it for granted. We've created certain mechanisms to make sure that there is a better connection between the needs of the people and the allocations that government makes. So whether you think about public participation as one space through which data is collected, information is collected, whether you think about all the service, and we have increasingly done more service, whether it's the health and demographic service, whether it's a census, whether it's a different administrative data and statistical data that we collect from time to time from businesses, from different communities. But having said that, coming back to the more limited, assessment of it, and we can come back to the discussion around program-based budgets and how that informs that credibility discussion, is that and then the report does show that, is that we are not spending all the money that we intended to spend. And this is just at the national level. If you go to the county level, perhaps it's more. But perhaps the discussion, and we largely, I think, across the country, we are somewhere about between 80 and 85% of spending. So in other words, how much we spend based on how much we allocated. But there are three issues that perhaps we want to think about as we move forward on matters credibility of our budgets. So the first challenge is the question of late disbursements. So money that is supposed to be spent by a certain sector. So all this, by the way, assumes that we allocated right. In other words, we put the right money for immunization, we put in the right money for livestock extension services, we put in the right money for environmental interventions, so assuming all that is done, and assuming that the budget they got is matching with the needs they need to be achieving the outcomes in the PBB and the like. So there's a question of late disbursements, which has to do with a reprioritization during budget. So in other words, when it comes to time of disbursing, decisions have to be made. Where do you disburse first? Now we see national government actually has better disbursements. The state of late disbursement is better at national government than at the county level. The second one is less disbursement. So this is where you get less than what you actually expected. And we've seen this at the end of the financial year. Counties have received, national MDAs have received perhaps 90%, sometimes counties, less than 90% of what they expected. Now, less disbursements is that then the money basically either is debated, is not released. Equalization fund is one of those. But then we have cases of non-disbursements. I think it's also an important discussion. This is where then finally the money actually never comes. So you basically can do away. So we have quite a bit of discussion. So we still need to have a conversation about especially the last two, the less and the none, because some of it is completely against the constitutional agreements and the requirements for that. And a lot of it is pushed that this is money that will come to you perhaps in the next financial year, and then like that, then it becomes a rolling basis and the like. So in general, I think this, first of all, the state of our credibility is not as good, where you're not still spending 15% of your budget. That is a matter of concern. But I have gone perhaps further into saying that there are other areas we need to discuss, so that then we are not just saying an MDA did not spend in the right way, yet they did not receive the money. I think it is wrong to punish and say somebody did not spend, yet they did actually not receive the money, or they received the money after the end of the financial year. And that does affect the credibility of the budgets.
So then what should we do? Should we just say they don't have the money, so they did not do what was expected, or what then? What can be done?
I think a big part of it is to guide that the same principles of allocating right be used when you are reprioritizing, because there's a lot of reprioritization that goes on through, and that's the essence of government. That's why we elect government. That's why we elect, because we all cannot go back, and have a conversation on every last item, but what has happened sometimes, you see that when there's a reprioritization, there's movement of money, sometimes even from very critical services, as you've had, social sectors, to more politically charged and more politically visible kind of infrastructure, so the reprioritization, if it can be human-centered, and there's been a lot of discussion around that, so that then at the end you still are targeting the more critical aspects of our development. The second one is really to go back to the question of realism, because a lot of the less and the non-disbursement is around revenue shortages. I think even the chief guest has talked about the cash flow problems. And that has to do with the realism within which we match our budget versus our revenue. And where the revenue projections don't just become filling the gap kind of deficit arrangement, where you say, okay, fine, this financial year, we have a deficit of 200 million, and therefore that is our revenue target. The realism, because what you've seen is that many times, even when even when revenues are not necessarily being matched, you're not adjusting the expenditures with the same. So for me, that aspect of what the basis, the principles upon which you do the reprioritization. So that is not just around politically charged issues, but secondly, the discussion around realism of our revenues, so that then, to the extent possible, you have a very small margin of error in terms of how much you can expect and how much you can spend. The last thing I wanted to say is that perhaps, colleagues, it's time to go back to a very serious conversation that around devolution. Now, I've had it and I've even seen it today. The thinking that devolution is about the creation of county governments. I think it's time we completely agreed that not completely agreed, but basically completely did away with that thinking, because devolution creates a national government and creates county governments. That's our devolved system of government. Never be confused. So there is no favor that a national government is doing to county governments. And that's why Schedule 14 is there. If there was no aspect of a national government and county governments, Schedule 14 would not exist. It will just basically be listed what county government, what national government allows county governments to do. The reason for that is that when it comes then to the questions around duplication of efforts, you've seen, for instance, the water budget is set to go up by 51% on environment. The health budget is up by 38%. Those are two devolved functions. A lot of those functions are actually county functions. And therefore, what that means, and that's connected to credibility and in effect, is that then you are spending at two levels the same thing on the same item. So in other words, you're taking money from county governments for health and for water. You are spending it at the national level. Of course, there's the question around presence on the ground, both by the national and the county governments. For me, I think that lies, and I was very excited when I was reading the Kenya Kwanza manifesto. I need to read it now a bit more loudly so that they can hear about this full devolution of functions. It is still not clear what exactly it means, but because the numbers suggest the opposite direction. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want us to shift the conversation a little bit and now talk about health. And specifically, I would want us to talk about the universal health coverage. So in recent times, we have seen the official development assistance, Rosemary, has been declining to developing countries, and they're being asked to now invest more adequately if they want to achieve UHC. So in our case, in our Kenyan situation, is the government committed to achieving universal health coverage?
Is that a trick question? Thank you very much for that question. You learn new things every day. I did. My friend Abraham used to be a student leader. I'm going to look at you differently from now on. Okay, so first of all, let me start by just saying, defining what universal health coverage is, because I think there's a misconception out there. So universal health coverage is the aspiration. It's this big goal that we have as a country, that by 2030, our citizens will be able to access quality care when they need it. It should be affordable. It should be of a high quality. So that is the aspiration. It's a big goal. It's up there. Now, how do we want to achieve this? The means to achieving this is strong health systems, investing in those. But the approach to achieve this is primary health care. I'm actually doing this so that I can respond to the question she's asked. Primary health care. Now, you're asking, is the government committed? Yes. From what we have read, from what we have seen, this country has one of the most robust policy frameworks in this region. People come here to learn from us. Our policy framework documents are very clear. The commitment is there. It's stated in those documents. Now, let's look back at when it comes to investments. Does our investment match the policy priorities, our blueprints that define how we are going to achieve these goals that we've set? I want to say that, and because the media is here, I want to be careful what I say. I want to say this. Over the past few years, we've seen significant improvements in how we set our priorities and how we allocate resources. But, and this is a big but, there's a clear mismatch between the policy priorities, the blueprints, the plans, and the investment priorities. Let me explain. If you look at the shadow budget, you realize that the health budget this year is going to increase.
Yeah.
Now, but when you look at where the money is going, 2 programs will take a significant chunk of this money. And this is the National Referral and Specialized Services and the Health Policy Standards and Regulations. Yeah, so one will take about, significant chunk will go to these 2 departments. Now, when you look at the National Referral and Specialized Services, now what services are offered there? And then you look at UHC, and the approach to achieve UHC is PHC. Where are those services offered? And what do those services constitute? So prevention, promotive, RMNCH. Now, you go back, you realize that preventive, promotive, and RMNCH program, you saw from one of those presentations that their absorption rate last year was 51%. And there are reasons why they did not meet their targets. But now they're going to suffer a reduction in budget. Their budget is going to go down to about 29% from 37% in the financial year 2022-2023. Now, the preventive, promotive, and RMNCH program, this is where your primary healthcare functions or services are. So to achieve UHC, which is a government commitment, you need to be investing here. But because they did not absorb most of their money last year, we are going to take away the budget. So this is I don't know if you have another question for me, if I can just go ahead. And
on the same, because I was waiting for your response so I can ask you the next question. If you're not investing more, where should we get the money? And Bernard in his presentation told us already we do not have as enough resources as we would want. So where will we get the additional resources? Or should we, as Rogo talked about, reprioritization within the sector, or what should happen?
First of all, and my health sector colleagues here, I'm not a public finance budget management specialist. I am an advocacy and policy person. Let me say this. It's not so much the question of investing more. It's 2 things. It's allocating right and spending well. I'm not saying we shouldn't allocate more. I'm just saying allocating right and spending well. Now, spending well means that, and allocating right means that we are setting the right priorities based on evidence, analysis, and the evidence is there. So how do we decide that it is more important to put money at the national referral health facilities and not at level 2, 3, and 4, where the majority of Kenyans are? How is that decision made when the analysis that is there, all the evidence shows that, well, nobody says we shouldn't invest in those facilities at that level, but the evidence also shows us the analysis that is there, the disease burden, everything. We know what would happen if we spent more time, we allocated right and made decisions around primary health care. How we would reduce, how much money we would save. The return on investment shows us that investing at that level is a best buy, any way you look at it. So I don't know if, so it's not so much investing more. It's important to invest the right, what is needed, but allocate right and spend well. So that means that when members of parliament sit to look at a budget, it's important to go back to what was spent the year. How did we perform the year before? What factors affected our performance? And that then should determine how we allocate, how we appropriate resources moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. And I have one last question for you. I hope you also don't say these are trick questions. So from the DPS, we noticed that the health sector will get an increase in its budget in the coming financial year. Would you say that this would be sufficient, given the ambitious goals that the government has set up in the health sector?
No, because as you say, the goals are ambitious. So you have the goals here. And we have costed plans in this country. Our primary healthcare strategy is costed. We know what it will cost us to set up the primary care networks, everything. So the allocation should be based on this. So you have the priorities here, very ambitious goals, and then you have the allocation here. Now, right now, what we would need actually to meet these ambitious goals is about 5% of GDP, which we won't get. Let's be honest with ourselves. Nobody's going to give us 5% of GDP. Right now we have 2% of GDP. So I'll go back to the fact that it's important to invest based on the needs. And maybe we need to look at I would say reprioritization. I know people won't be happy if you were to move money from one sector to give it to the other one. But I want to answer that question also this way. It's like going shopping. You're a Kenyan. You walk into a supermarket and you buy cheese. You people know what cheese is, isn't it? Instead of you buy a kilo of cheese is expensive. That would be like 2,000 bob. And you buy 2 packets of bunga. And you have 6 children. First of all, you don't need the cheese. So I hope you get the analogy there. So I think it's important for us to really look at how we are prioritizing and how we are allocating money. We definitely, as an advocate for the health sector, we definitely need more money, but are we gonna get it? Maybe no. So how do we use the money that we have? Spending right, spending well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. One last question for you, Dr. Abraham. So currently the government is experiencing liquidity challenges, and this is likely to affect also the transfers to the counties. While this is the case, we have also seen the counties spend more than 35% of their total revenues. What is required under law on compensation to employees? Is there a challenge in our laws, or is it just an issue with the oversight?
Thank you. Allow me first to go back to what Rosemary said just in a minute. I think it's time for us to start seeing the interconnection of what we call, other determinants of health, so that then we think about how much of our spending in water is actually a health spending. How much of our spending in education? Research has shown that the education of the mother determines a lot the household health. How much of that is actually a health spending? How much of our spending in agriculture and nutrition is actually a health spending? I think if we aggregated that, and within the thinking of primary healthcare, perhaps we will arrive at the challenges. We don't see this as connected. And of course, every ministry department sees its role as in a siloed function. But for me, I see the connections, and I think perhaps if we did that, we would achieve some of our goals perhaps faster. 35% of wages. So first, I'll say something controversial, then I'll try to redeem myself. The 35% of spending on wages is not a scientific figure. And this is my reasoning, that first of all, I don't think any county should be punished for spending more than 35% on wages. The reason for this is that every society must determine its level of spending dependent or as a factor of the development level where they have reached. Take an example. In Nairobi, in Nakuru, most of Nakuru, Mombasa, the spending for improvement of services is not infrastructure driven. It's actually human resource driven, because there you are not struggling with availability of facilities. You need more nurses because of the population per service, population per service provider. And therefore, you cannot argue that spending for Nairobi should be below 35% because there is nothing about development being capital, brick, and mortar. That's just our own creation and creation of politicians like former Mwaura. So we need to actually determine what is development for Kenya at this particular point. Let me give you another example. Kitui County, and this is CRA research, Kitui County has an excess of dispensaries in terms of buildings. Now, if you want to provide health services in Kitui County, now this is a rural county, you don't need to build any more dispensaries. What you need is teachers in those dispensaries. In most of Upper Eastern, Eastern and Northeastern, right now, where the birth rate is the opposite of Central Kenya, you need more ECDs. Either you need to transfer the ECD teachers from Central to the other side. The point I'm trying to make is that we need to and this was the essence of devolution, that every county as a space of service delivery need to determine what is development at that level. And the 35%, by the way, for some counties, it is really, if they want to do exactly 35%, it means sucking people. It means not providing certain services. But for other counties, 35% is aspirational. They aim for it. So they employ everybody. I mean, an example is Turkana County, where they even have more pending bills than some urban counties, but you still cannot say that they have more staff, So I think we need to bring it to that context so that then it ceases to be a limiting factor, but rather it becomes facilitative. Budgets must be facilitative of service delivery. That's my take about 35%. So let me try and redeem myself. Having said all I've said, I think it is important for us to consistently set some of these limits based, so that they're not necessarily moving targets, but they are responsive. So for instance, in healthcare, you cannot have a 35% spending because a lot of healthcare provision is service. It's about human beings. If you go to a health facility, it has all the equipment, but there's no nurse, my friend. You'll actually say it has the worst services. In a ECD, for instance, early childhood development and education sector, agriculture is a big part of agriculture that is mechanization. But the essence of it is that for you to actually move to the next level of agriculture is really about the operationalization of that mechanization. It's about agriculture extension officers, being available for those kind of farmers. So that's my take about the 35%. So that then it's something we have challenged. We've written to Parliament and said we need to stop seeing this, as something that is limiting, and that every county must spend 30% on at least 30% on development. What is development? Thank you.
Thank you. And I wish we had more time for this discussion, but sadly, we have to end it at that. But I'll give you each in under 30 seconds. What is your brief call to action based on the discussions that we've had here, from the presentations, from the keynote addresses, from the discussions that we have had? Briefly, what is your call to action? Start with you, Ruth.
Thank you very much. As we make our call for action, I start by reiterating that the Constitution of Kenya and the legal frameworks in Kenya have given very clear and very specific provisions to promote the good principles of public finance management in Kenya. And our key message and the key call that we are bringing up today is to implement and to ensure that these principles of public finance management are upheld. Fiscal discipline, effectiveness, and efficiency in utilization of resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Dr. Abraham.
I think for me is really to, against the quote that was read here earlier, I think it's time to really work towards directing spending for the common good. We all stand to gain if spending is done right. And therefore the wastage does not serve anyone, does not even serve the one wasting. Because if you're stuck in some funny part of this country, funny is the wrong word, if you're stuck in a remote part of this country and you get a snake bite, And there was an article, I think, in yesterday's newspaper. What will save you in that facility is not your health insurance. It is not even the contacts of the doctors you know. It is whether the health facility in that place has antivenom and the nurse there is present that day and knows how to administer that antivenom. In other words, spending right is for our collective benefit and for the better part of our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Yeah, mine is to send this message as the final word, that the mismatch between how we set priorities and how we allocate resources needs to be addressed. And to do that is to rely more on evidence-based decision-making. And I'm saying this because Honorable Mwaura is here, particularly to members of parliament. A lot of times you guys shop like the person who went to buy cheese instead of to buy unga. So without looking at the data, you do, but a lot of the people in parliament don't. So asking that we match the priorities to how we invest, because right now, if UHC is a commitment to the government, the investment that is for UHC now is below the benchmark that is needed to achieve what we've set for ourselves. So the idea of allocating right and spending right is important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And we cannot emphasize more allocating right, spending right, matching our budgets to needs. Asanteni sana. Back to you, Lurit.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and our able panelists for that interesting discussion. I told you people they would shake the room, and I bet you've had it from each of their respective sentiments on how they view various critical elements of resource allocation, expenditures, and generally just the entire concept of trying to ensure that we are embedding human-based principles in everything we do, regarding policy, regarding budgeting, regarding public finance in general. Now, the sound team at the back, I don't know if you have drum rolls, or I don't know how we're going to make this a bit, interesting and dramatic, but we are moving into a very interesting segment of what really brought us here. And how we're just about to transform public finance management in general. And that's what this particular segment is really about. You can smile for the photos as the front is being prepared. You can have your December teeth out, and try to just be as enthusiastic as possible. The team continues to ensure this is in check. David, we're good? Yeah. Okay, Marianne, this is that time again. This is that time again. You're good? All right, great. So we are proceeding into the official launch of the annual national shadow budget for the fiscal year 2023-2024. With that said, we have Honorable Dr. Isaac Mwaura, our CEO, James Muraguri, our country lead and head of programs, Daniel Ndirangu, and our head of research, Ruth Kendagor.
Thank you very much. And as we make, where is Ruth? I'm looking for Ruth, in this. Ladies and gentlemen, IPF as an independent think tank, we are thrilled to present this third edition of the annual shadow budget. This edition is particularly significant as Kenya is currently experiencing distress due to external shocks such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, high inflation, and increasing debt stock and rising debt. This document requires that the government achieves fiscal consolidation while providing resources for the ambitious bottom-up approach. Bwana Waziri, the bottom-up approach requires significant resources. And so what we know also is regarding fiscal decentralization. This shadow budget that we are launching today requires that counties, that are relying heavily on equitable share, consider prudent ways of spending that. And moving forward, we believe the Kenya's fiscal approach should be supported by a robust institutional framework and coordination among ministries, departments, and agencies, of which the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary is responsible. So we look forward that the recommendations out of the shadow budget will find life within your office and that we can advance this conversation. So let me invite everyone as we launch this shadow budget.
Abraham Rugo and Dr. Rosemary, please join this segment of the photo session.
This way. Thank you. Open and I like the way
And you have just in our culture, as people who work in policy, we normally give a round of applause, drum rolls, or something, but I didn't even hear any of them from the crowd. Colleagues, The annual national shadow budget for fiscal year 2023-2024 has just been launched. All right, with that said, the discussions have been very enthralling and have been very informative when it comes to what really needs to be done in defining development, in ensuring better parliamentary oversight, and in ensuring proper governance at every level, that is county, national, and any other level that is significant to the national development of Kenya and any other country as well. So in this particular case, allow me to welcome our country lead and head of programs, Daniel Dirangu, to give his closing remarks and a vote of thanks to each one of you before we move to the final segment, that is the plenary.
Thank you, and good morning, colleagues. My colleagues made sure they sneak a roll for me towards the end, and I'm grateful that we've chose to stay in with us this far. Profound gratitude to all of us for being here up to this point, staying in since morning, and even our viewers that are viewing us online. The media, thank you for staying in with us. Our chief guest, Honorable Dr. Isaac Mwaura, our panelist, Dr. Abraham Rugo, Dr. Rosemary Mugunda, and Ruth Kendagor. Thank you very much. Also, I want to thank our colleagues without whom this report will not have been possible. They've done an immense, an incredible job. I hope you found from the presentation and continue to find that in the main report, preparing this and putting together all these ideas to the betterment of this country. I think we have learned a lot, and there's many lessons that we can draw from this launch and also from the discussion that has come through. I think there's one quote that also has come out is that we need to allocate well and spend better. You know, I could be alternating the words, but something towards that line. And it's the spirit of this annual shadow budget to launch, to spend well and allocate better as we speak about effectiveness. So we thank you all. We wish you a pleasant morning. Thank you all our partners for coming in. And we hope to engage even at the committee levels as our chief guest and keynote speaker recommended, that these findings are not just for this discussion, but we'll use them to engage different committees in Parliament. So good morning to all of you, and karibuni chai. There's still breakfast served around this corner. Asanteni, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that. Now we will just open up quickly for the media plenary conversation. But people, please feel free to serve as much breakfast as possible, since a lot of it is still being served. And remember to keep the conversation going as much as possible. From engaging us on digital and media platforms, please feel free to use the hashtag annual national shadow budget and hashtag evidence-based budgeting. Feel free to download, cite, and refer to our full report that is on our website, and we will be posting more details about that as the day goes by. And lastly, please be public finance champions with the Institute of Public Finance at all points whatsoever. That said, we're opening up for the media questions. James, I don't know if you're going to take the podium. Great.
Thank you, Rich, and I'm glad to take any media question. Is there? But it's okay not to have any question. It's okay. All right. Can we move the mic to that, Ed, please?
It doesn't necessarily have to be media alone, right?
Yeah, and our partners, in case there is.
Partners, our distinguished guests. This
Hello.
is your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for the clarity, because I'm not from the media fraternity. My name is Jack. I'm from an organization, a partner called Transformers. We're based in Mathare. Thank you so much, Honorable Isaac, for passing through Georgia Road. And you saw our green city is called Chocolate City. In this discussion, I was very pleased by the presentation on the allocation towards health. But because if you talk about health, this morning, when we had a case of Mandamano those days, Madare was a hotbed of mothers not going to hospitals. Our kind of if you go there, the drainage system is so poor. But one thing that really passed me, I didn't pick it from this one, is the discussion on affordable housing, because when we talk about the agriculture being given a cap and then reduced, but I'm not seeing the affordable housing component, more so to eradicate the slum in our urban cities. And I would maybe just forgot the name, but I would like to call on Dr. Rugo, who said about not giving counties a 35% allocation, that we should be giving them based on what they are able to achieve. But if you look at Nairobi City County, the NMS component, the amount of money that were allocated for those 3 years, and the debt we have from Nairobi NMS, and what we have all called slums and around, I feel as a hustler nation, we need to work deeply in interrogating these people. And this discussion, let's take them to those areas. Nairobi County, majority of us stay in the slums, but we're not having this information. Come down to them, ask them their need priorities. Not just coming here, we come to this meeting, but we can't go down there. I think that's a case that need to be addressed in this document. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jack, and that's a very valid concern. I know if you get a copy of this document, with regards to housing, we have captured on that because we recognize the importance. It's within the sector recommendations. Only that the highlights that we presented was on specific. We could not do the 10 sectors, but housing is captured, and we also recognize that there's government commitment with regards to housing. And I probably talk on behalf of Dr. Rugo, who said that 5%. We're talking about the allocation to wage, not necessarily to allocation to counties, but allocation to personnel, so that we don't base allocation of personnel against infrastructure, because Nairobi County has infrastructure. So you do not need any more infrastructure, like for health, for example, you need more nurses. In Kitui, he gave the example of so many dispensaries, but they do not have nurses. So would you tell Kitui County not to hire nurses and do more dispensaries so that they can cap? I think that's a very valid conversation we have. And thank you very much for raising that. And I invite you to look on the sector that has housing within the document. We've tried to address those questions so that we can guide the parliamentary committee responsible for housing on that. Happy to take the next question so that we can close, and we apologize for the time that our time has really moved. Take that one more question, and then we can have our tea as guests leave at their own pleasure.
Hi, my name is Anissa Mujiri from Capital FM, and I have two questions. For the ordinary Kenyan out there, how does the shadow budget report differ from the official government budget report? And the second question, how can ordinary citizens engage the shadow budget report and use its recommendations to hold the government accountable?
Thank you very much, Anissa from Capital FM. And I agree that that's a very pertinent question. The difference between the shadow budget and what the government produces is the government, what is classified, the theory of the legality of armed violence, that is with the government. We do not have the legality of armed violence. So the government has the power to generate, because the social contract is between the state and the citizens. We do not have the social contract as IPF with the citizen, but we are looking at what government is proposing and trying to generate a parallel view so that citizens have evidence that they can generate government. As Moira and also the rest of the panelists have said, citizens, if you are hungry, you will not interrogate a 600 pages document if you're hungry. Your first key is to survive. And for us as IPF, we are taking that opportunity to simplify the conversation through this shadow budget. And we've generated questions that citizens can ask. Parliamentarians, you can ask your MP, can you ask the cabinet secretary why this is not happening? So that's a conversation we are helping citizens think through. And how can citizens engage? Citizens, we will make this document available on our website, on our social media pages. We know people they spend much more money on data than on food. So if we put it online, they will get it. And then you can check, you can engage with that, with those questions, and also reach out to us as IPF. And we encourage citizens and stakeholders to engage with us to drive this conversation as we look forward to what the government will present to Parliament on April 30th. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I now officially invite you for a cup of tea and snacks. Thank you. And thank you very much for coming today. Asante.
All right, as we grab tea, our guests can feel free to get a few copies of